Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, your host, the 80s Mixtaper. Hope you're all having a good week. For me personally, it's been a lot of ups and downs in the past 7 days. So none of you will be aware, but back at the beginning of May, one of our two cats, who has been with us for 14 years, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And this little fella has been like my shadow for about 12 of those years. We've had a very special bond, and he'd be there morning, noon and night, always wanting cuddles and affection. He was a beautiful cat. Everybody in the street, down the vets, at the cattery absolutely loved him. And suddenly he was diagnosed with this awful tumour in his mouth. Chemo would have made his life miserable and would have maybe given him 3 more months, but we decided to let him see out his days in peace and happiness. Well, as you may have seen from my Instagram post, Tuesday just gone was the day, if you will. And if you're a pet owner who has had to make that call, you know that the pet can't tell you, and there isn't just a day circled on the calendar. You get the period when you're told, the period after when things sort of go back to normal for a while, and then you get good days and bad days, and then you get about a fortnight when they can't feed themselves as well, they can't clean themselves, or they have an accident, and so you help them, but you know in your heart of hearts that it's cruel to go too early and it's cruel to go too late. So it's this awful guessing game of when to make that call. And it's just the worst thing to do, because you'll start noticing things which contradict it, like, oh, his tail is still up, or he ate well, or you could see he really didn't want to get in the carrier. I mean, kudos to my wife, who was the one to pick him up. She was in absolute bits. And we stayed with him when the vet did what the vet needed to do. And it was ever so peaceful. But, wow, I mean, the grief I felt afterwards. What did it was coming back home, almost feeling relieved, walking into the kitchen and then saying to my wife, well, do we still put 2 bowls of food down tomorrow? And I was just absolutely in bits for about an hour. And I'm not going to lie, it took a good few days just to pull myself together. What helped me was music. Music is the thing that has and always will pull me back in. It can't cure cancer. It can't fix the world's ills. But it takes you out of yourself for a while, takes you to a different time, a different place, or just takes your mind off things. And I think that's part of why I do the pod. It has its own interest and energy that sustains me, and I hope sustains you too. And hopefully that makes some of the more difficult days a bit easier. And then on Friday, a bit of respite when me, my wife, my sister and brother-in-law went to Delaprey Abbey in Northampton for a mini 80s festival. Delaprey, if you've never been, is this beautiful old abbey with a massive country park attached to it. And they started doing concerts there a few years ago, which is an absolute boon because, believe it or not, Northampton gets very little major through traffic of events. It either tends to go to Birmingham or Milton Keynes. So we sat and baked in the sun and caught the back end of Johnny Hates Jazz's set, which was good. Mark Armand was the person I really wanted to see, and he was just so brilliant. He even forgot the opening to one of his own songs and forgot the lines on another, and was just giggling as the crowd laughed along, and he responded with, well, I am old. But it didn't matter. If anything, it made his performance the performance of the day, as he went through his own solo catalogue, and then all of the great soft sell hits like Torch, Bedsitter, Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, my personal favourite, and of course Tainted Love. We then had Wet, Wet, Wet. And I literally said before they came on, oh, I think I only know about 3 of their songs. And then, of course, I knew all of them apart from 2. Even without Marty Pello, the chap who is now the lead singer was really good. And they're touring to promote 40 years of their debut at the moment. And then we ended with Martin Fry and ABC. No gold lame jacket, unfortunately. But naturally, they knocked it out of the park with all the great stuff from the Lexicon of Love, which we've pretty much just covered. So if you see tickets for them this year, I'd recommend all of them. Still incredible performers 40 years on. And just to end on some more positive news, someone has finally bought me a coffee. Thank you, thank you, thank you to David Moy, who very kindly donated to the cause. Of course, this now means that I need to roast David's name by thinking about what fictional role he played in 80s music. Well, the name David Moy to me suggests that David was a session genius on the marimba. Maybe late 70s going into the 80s, big in post-punk, really showed the way for acts like Japan and the Yellow Magic Orchestra. David was responsible for the blonde haircut, which David Sylvian would eventually emulate. So there you go, David Moy, the man who taught the 80s about the marimba. If you would like to contribute to the upkeep of the show and then have your name roasted on the pod, you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the episode description. All donations greatly welcomed. So, what do we have in store today? Well, as mentioned in the outro of last week, the next 4 weeks are big ones in terms of introducing the big acts of the 80s. And we start this week in playlist 47. We step into September 1982, and this week we meet Boy George and Culture Club. Patrick Cowley brings the San Francisco High NRG, and we explore his brilliant but brief story. Billy Idol gets the US hot in the city. We meet one of the unsung heroes of the new wave of British heavy metal in Diamond Head. Mari Wilson scores an unlikely 60s-ish hit. We explore the scandal of the Pinkees, and we zoom to the end with Fat Larry's band. As always, unfortunately due to copyright laws I can't actually play the songs in the pod, so you'll hear a short introduction from me to the track, and then I've put links to both Spotify and Apple Music to the playlist in the episode description, so you can pause the pod and listen along. We'll then talk about each artist and the song in depth. So without further ado, let's get back to the music. Alright, pot pickers, let's start playlist 47 by inserting the next electronic coin into our glorious jukebox of the 1980s and travel back to San Francisco in September 1982. The glitter of 1970s disco has been thoroughly bricked over by rock traditionalists, yet underground something far heavier, sleeker and faster is mutating. Welcome back to the world of High NRG, last visited in episode 45 when we met the Boys Town gang. Our first track on playlist 47 is a monument of electronic liberation born right out of the San Francisco club culture. This track peaks at number 4 on the US Billboard Dance Club Songs chart and rockets straight into the UK Top 40, peaking at 32 in September 1982. It's a story of community and tragedy. Put on your dancing shoes, hit the lights, and ask yourself, do you want a funk? This is track 1. Let's introduce the man behind the machines of this blistering electronic masterpiece, because this is our only deep dive into the tragic genius of Patrick Cowley. Patrick Joseph Cowley was born on the 19th of October 1950 in Buffalo, New York. He wasn't born into the strobe lights of California, he migrated there, moving to San Francisco at the age of 21 with his best friend after studying English at the University of Buffalo. He enrolled at the City College of San Francisco, where he studied music under Professor Gerald Mueller. In this environment, he learned to master early synthesizers like the Putney, Electronic Music Studios gear and Surge systems. Cowley began stitching together experimental instrumental soundscapes, drawing immense inspiration from older electronic wizards like Tomita, Wendy Carlos and Giorgio Moroder. In 1979, Cowley's music took an unusual commercial turn. He was contacted by John Coletti, owner of the Los Angeles gay adult film production company Fox Studio. Cowley sold Coletti reels of his experimental college synth compositions, which Coletti then adapted as soundtracks for adult films like Muscle Up and School Days, using a variable speed oscillator to sync the sound to the scenes. But his mainstream destiny lay in the clubs. By 1978, Cowley's formidable synth skills caught the ear of Bay Area disco icon Sylvester James, simply known as Sylvester. Sylvester hired Cowley to join his studio band. Cowley played synthesizer on Sylvester's breakthrough 1978 album, Step 2, injecting a throbbing futuristic pulse into You Make Me Feel Mighty Real and Dance Disco Heat. He effectively mutated Sylvester's original gospel-style concept for Mighty Real into a soaring, high-velocity liberation anthem. He went on to pen tracks like Stars and I Need Somebody to Love Tonight for Sylvester's 1979 album Stars. As the 80s dawned, Cowley stepped out as a solo artist. In 1981, alongside business partner Marty Bleckman, he co-founded Megatone Records, an independent label built to house the blooming San Francisco sound. Cowley unleashed a pair of monster solo club hits, Menergy and the explosive Megatron Man. Both tracks soared to number 1 and number 2 respectively on the Billboard Hot Dance Music Club Play chart in 1981. He famously crafted a legendary underground long-form remix of Donna Summer's I Feel Love, which became a holy grail for club DJs. By early 1982, Cowley was the undisputed king of High NRG. He produced the hit Right on Target for Paul Parker, which hit number 1 on the Billboard dance chart. But behind the flashing lights, a dark shadow was looming. During a European tour, Cowley began feeling intensely fatigued and fell ill. He was hospitalised with a mysterious, terrifying condition that doctors could not yet identify, what the world would soon come to know as AIDS. Time was cruelly short, but Cowley reunited with his old partner in crime Sylvester for one final blast of studio magic. The inspiration for the track actually came from I'm Your Genie, a single by Jeannie Tracy, who happened to be a background vocalist for Sylvester. Cowley stripped down the rhythm, cranked up the tempo, and laid down an infectious, syncopated electronic bass line. Sylvester delivered a commanding, ecstatic vocal performance, demanding to know if the listener truly wanted a funk. The song was released in 1982 on Megatone Records and was eventually tacked onto Sylvester's 6th studio album, All I Need. It became an immediate global club sensation. While it hit number 4 on the Billboard dance chart at home, mainland Europe absolutely lost its mind for it. The track became a resounding top 10 hit in Belgium, Finland and Norway, and cracked the top 20 in the Netherlands and Switzerland. It even etched itself permanently into 80s pop culture when it was featured prominently in the 1983 comedy film Trading Places, starring Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. Tragically, Do You Wanna Funk served as a beautiful, energetic farewell. On the 12th of November 1982, just months after the track's release, Patrick Cowley passed away from AIDS-related complications at the age of just 32. He became one of the very first high-profile artistic casualties of this awful epidemic. Proving that life can be devastatingly poetic, Sylvester would continue to perform the anthem globally before Sylvester himself succumbed to the same illness 6 years later in December 1988. Do You Wanna Funk remains a blazing goodbye to an electronic music pioneer who built the future of dance music while running out of time. Next up, a song the UK just wasn't ready for yet. That's the story of this next guy's early 80s. It is the summer of 1981 and the neon lights of Times Square are competing with the suffocating humidity of a New York night. You have left the rainy pavements of London behind. You have traded the crumbling punk battlegrounds of the late 70s for something entirely different. America. Your name is Billy Idol. 1 year prior, in 1980, you were fronting the punk outfit Generation X, releasing the single Dancing With Myself, a song we heard all the way back in episode 14.5. It was a great track, a frantic hybrid of power pop melody and jagged punk aggression. But Generation X was fracturing. When the band split, you packed a single suitcase and took a flight to New York City. The UK punk scene was looking backward or dissolving into post-punk gloom, but you wanted the future. You wanted the dance floors, the synths, and the sprawling, unforgiving scale of American radio. When you arrived, Chrysalis Records was tasked with figuring out what to do with a British punk rocker covered in leather and sporting a permanent peroxide snarl. They initially put out a 4-song EP in 1981 titled Don't Stop. That EP packaged your old Generation X track Dancing With Myself along with a cover of Tommy James and the Shondells' Mony Mony. It did fine, but it was a bridge between what you were and what you were about to become. The real test would come with your first proper solo album. You sat down and wrote a song inspired by your very first summer, baking in the Big Apple, a track about running wild through the sweltering, dangerous, optimistic streets of your new home city. What you make is the single, Hot in the City. This is track 2. When we look back at the incredible career of Billy Idol, we think of the heavy, driving rock riffs. We think of White Wedding or the thunderous roar of Rebel Yell. But the song that actually launched Billy Idol into the American top 40 was Hot in the City, a track that relies far more on synth stabs, female backing singers, and an infectious pop dance rhythm than it does on heavy metal guitar pyrotechnics. The track was produced by Keith Forsey, a British producer and drummer who had already worked with Generation X and would later become an absolute titan of 80s pop, producing massive hits like Simple Minds' Don't You Forget About Me in 1985. But we're not there yet. Forsey understood that to capture the American market, Idol needed to blend his post-punk attitude with a polished commercial dance pop sensibility. Entering the studio to record the eponymous Billy Idol album, they crafted Hot in the City. The track was officially released as a single in July 1982. It served as the public's introduction to Billy Idol as a solo artist, but the label faced a major hurdle. American radio programmers were terrified of punk rock. When the Mony Mony single had failed to make a major impact on the charts earlier, peaking down at number 107, Idol attributed the failure to the single's sleeve art, which featured him looking like a menacing spiked-haired punk. Fearing a repeat performance, Chrysalis made a tactical decision for the American release of Hot in the City. The US single was issued with an overhead photograph of a city street on the cover, completely hiding Billy's face and punk styling from suspicious radio directors. The strategy worked perfectly. The song entered the airwaves and eventually climbed to number 23 on the US Billboard Hot 100. It also proved highly successful globally, hitting number 5 in New Zealand and number 18 in Australia. To maximise its local appeal across North America, the record company pulled off an incredibly brilliant marketing gimmick. In the middle of the track, right as the tension peaks, Idol screams out, "I can really feel the heat now, New York." Chrysalis had Idol record customised vocal takes, swapping out New York for various local markets. If you were listening to a radio station in Boston, Minneapolis or New Haven, you heard Billy Idol shout out your own city's name, making the track feel like an exclusive local anthem. The accompanying 1982 music video, directed by Kurt Falkenberg III, captured this urban aesthetic by blending shots of Idol singing against artificial backdrops with stock footage of nuclear bomb tests. While the song only reached a modest number 58 on the UK upon its original release, a 1987 remix later pushed it all the way to number 13 on the UK singles chart. Hot in the City proved that Billy Idol was not just a relic of London's punk past, but a forward-thinking pop star ready to conquer a brand new decade, just not quite yet in his home country. Next up, we're diving deeper into the archives to pull a single from a band that standard pop history pretty much forgot, but a certain multi-millionaire American thrash metal band holds completely sacred. This is a journey to Stourbridge, West Midlands, where the guitars were loud, the hair was long, and major label money was briefly thrown at four blokes who just wanted to sound like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. Let's head into the dark with Diamond Head and their creeping, slow-burning epic in the heat of the night. This is track 3, playlist 47. Let's talk about Diamond Head. Depending on who you ask, they are either the tragic almost made-its of British rock history or the ultimate insiders band. Let's travel back to 1976 to trace their roots. Schoolmates Brian Tatler on guitar and Duncan Scott on drums started jamming together in Stourbridge. They eventually recruited singer Sean Harris and bassist Colin Kimberley to complete the classic lineup. Their name, it was chosen by Tatler after he saw a poster for a 1975 solo album by Roxy Music guitarist Phil Manzanera called Diamond Head. By late 1979 and early 1980, the UK was caught in the grip of the new wave of British heavy metal, while contemporaries like Iron Maiden, Def Leppard and Saxon were successfully launching themselves into the mainstream stratosphere. Diamond Head were doing things the hard way. Their legendary 1980 debut album, Lightning to the Nations, didn't even get a proper label release initially. Instead, it was put out through an independent label called Happy Face Records. To save cash, it was sent out in a plain white sleeve with zero text, track listings, or artwork. It became known as the White Album and was sold via mail order and at gigs. That raw independent record should have made them superstars, but if you've never heard of them, that tells you it didn't. But instead, it served as a blueprint for a young fan named Lars Ulrich, who famously used their sound to form Metallica. In fact, Metallica would go on to cover multiple songs from that debut album over their career. But back to the 1980s, Diamond Head finally got their major label break when they signed to MCA Records. MCA had cash, big ideas, and an appetite for the burgeoning metal scene. They paired the band with producer Mike Hedges, a man who would later become famous for producing goth and alternative icons like The Cure and Susie and the Banshees. This production choice explains the exact sonic shift we hear on today's track. In the Heat of the Night was released in June 1982 as a single and featured on their second studio album, Borrowed Time. The album itself, which was released on the 15th of October 1982, featured a striking custom fantasy cover painted by artist Rodney Matthews, depicting characters inspired by Michael Moorcock's Elric fantasy stories. Musically, the song represents a stark pivot from the blistering riffs of their debut. Running at nearly 5 minutes, In the Heat of the Night is often classed as a power ballad, leaning heavily on atmosphere, melody and traditional rock blues undertones. Tatler's guitar work trades pure speed for a creeping, crawling mid-paced tempo, allowing Sean Harris to deliver a highly expressive vocal performance. Lyrically, the track moves completely away from standard rock and roll cliches, opting instead for high fantasy escapism. Harris sings a tale of a captured warrior being marched up to a tower by steely eyes of a silvery people, walk behind me with evil intent. He is stripped of his rank and locked behind adamantine doors, drawing mental strength from the memory of a woman's face during the delirium of a tortured mind. MCA pushed the song hard, releasing it across multiple physical formats. The push worked kinda, sorta, at least initially. According to the official charts history, Borrowed Time hit number 24 on the UK album charts in 1982, allowing the group to headline major venues like London's Hammersmith Odeon. However, the polished major label production divided their core heavy metal fan base, and a lack of a crucial US tour meant they never broke America on their own merits. By 1985, the original lineup had fractured. So while Diamond Head remains a minor commercial footnote compared to the giants of the era, In the Heat of the Night is a beautifully constructed, atmospheric token of a brief moment when Stourbridge metal dared to go radio friendly. For track 4, when we think of the early 80s British pop landscape, it's a massive dressing room of talent where history was constantly being rewritten, borrowed and sprayed with extreme amounts of hairspray. You had synth pop pioneers trying to soundtrack a dystopian future, and then you had the traditionalists looking backward with a heavy dose of irony and theatrical affection. But in September 1982, if you turned on the television or flipped through a British music magazine, you were suddenly confronted by a tower of hair, a literal structural marvel. This was the skyscraper beehive hairdo of a woman who looked like she'd stepped directly out of a 1963 Brill Building session or a Motown review, yet she was operating in the post-punk fallout of London. She wore long evening gloves, massive costume jewellery, and performed with a deadpan stylised camp that was utterly mesmerising. Her backing band was a sprawling 12-piece beast known as the Wilsations. Her name is Mari Wilson, often affectionately dubbed the Neasden Queen of Soul. And after floating on the periphery of the charts with early indie singles, she finally captured the exact intersection of a retro visual aesthetic and a perfectly tailored pop song. It was a track that sounded positively 60s and new all at once, driven by a giant framing electronic drum and a tongue-in-cheek lyric about wanting the finer things in life, but mostly wanting love. This is Just What I Always Wanted. To truly understand Just What I Always Wanted, we have to trace the metaphorical and literal roots of the woman behind that massive beehive. Mari Wilson was born Mari Macmillan Ramsey Wilson on September the 29th, 1954 in Neasden, northwest London. Neasden is an ordinary suburb of London, famously used as a running joke for the mundane by satirical magazines like Private Eye, making her eventual title the Neasden Queen of Soul both an honour and a bit of a dry British joke. Growing up, Wilson translated a deep, genuine love of late 1950s and early 1960s girl groups, Motown and classic pop vocalists like Dusty Springfield into her own burgeoning musical persona. Her recording career didn't begin with a major label splash. Instead, she signed with an independent label called the Compact Organisation, run by Tot Taylor. Her initial foray into vinyl was the 1980 single Love Man, where she was backed by a group called the Imaginations. She followed this with another minor single, Dance Card, before her backing musicians were permanently branded as the Wilsations. By 1982, the momentum was beginning to shift. Wilson managed to crack the lower rungs of the official UK charts with the electronic-tinged Beat the Beat, which peaked at number 59, and she crept even close to the mainstream radar with a follow-up single titled Baby It's True, I Can't Stop Myself, which reached number 42. But they were just the warm-up acts for what happened in the late summer of 1982. Just What I Always Wanted was released as a single as the formal vanguard for what would become her 1983 debut studio album Show People. The track was written by songwriter Teddy Johns and produced by Tony Mansfield, a musician known for his work with the synth pop group New Music, who we met all the way back in episode 4.5. Mansfield brought a fascinating sonic juxtaposition to the table. While Wilson's vocals and the horn arrangement screamed 1960s pastiche, Mansfield anchored the track with massive synthetic 1980s electronic drum programming. The lyricism of Just What I Always Wanted is uniquely meta and deeply tied to the actual production team surrounding Wilson. The narrative sets up a material dilemma. A wealthy suitor offers her everything money can buy, while a penniless alternative offers only himself. During this lyrical laundry list of high society desires, Wilson explicitly name-checks 3 real-world figures. She demands an art piece from Pablo Picasso, singing "Not one Picasso, he'll give me a pair." Then she asks for a tune from Teddy, a direct shout-out to the song's actual writer, Teddy Johns. Finally, she asks for an Ashworth snap, which was a direct nod to Peter Ashwood, the prominent musical photographer responsible for shooting her iconic, highly stylised promotional artwork. Critics immediately took notice of the track's brilliant execution. Robin Denslow, writing for The Guardian, perfectly encapsulated the cultural moment by noting that with just what I always wanted, Mari Wilson had found the perfect song to fit her image. He remarked that it was emotional, slightly camp and sounding as if it might have been a pop hit back in the early 60s, praising how it was performed with a signature deadpan panache that matched her long evening gloves, jewellery and skyscraper hair. The public agreed, driven by memorable performances on television shows like BBC's Top of the Pops. The single began a steady climb. It spent a total of 10 weeks on the official charts, eventually peaking at number 8 in October 1982. It became the defining commercial peak of her pop career. The success of the single launched her debut album Show People into the UK charts when it arrived in February 1983, peaking at number 24. The album also yielded a successful cover of Arthur Hamilton's jazz standard Cry Me a River, which reached number 27 in the UK charts. However, by the mid-1980s, the crushing weight of the pop machine and the relentless demands of celebrity culture began to wear on Wilson. She consciously chose to pull back from the major label pop circus, scaling down the massive 12-piece Wilsations to focus her musical talents on live jazz performances, musical theatre and intimate club shows. She went on to play respected venues like Ronnie Scott's, and here's a fantastic nod to all my late Gen Xers and early millennials out there, eventually recording the well-known theme song Perhaps, Perhaps, Perhaps for the BBC sitcom Coupling. But it all traces back to those 3 minutes and 22 seconds in the autumn of 1982, when a girl from Neasden proved that nostalgia, when wrapped in electronic drums and deadpan genius, could become the future. Next up, how do you describe this moment? One of maybe 20 key waypoints in 80s global pop culture, like the introduction of Thriller or Madonna's arrival. Either way, it's an earth-shaking moment for a song so delicate and a figure who over the decades has been so complex, blessed with an incredible voice. Imagine walking into a Soho basement nightclub in 1980. The air is thick with hairspray, cigarette smoke and a desperate, beautiful need to escape the grey reality of a collapsing British economy. You look toward the bar and see a person who does not look like they belong to Earth, let alone the suburbs of Kent. He is wearing white pan-stick makeup, a massive brimmed hat, and clothes that look like they were stolen from a vibrant theatrical production. This is George Allen O'Dowd, working the coat check at the Blitz nightclub. He isn't famous yet. He has no record contract, but he is already a superstar in his own orbit. 2 years later, that coat check clerk would be the most talked about person on the planet. He would stand in front of the television cameras on Top of the Pops, wearing long braids, ribbons and a flowing tunic, singing a song that sounded like a heartbreak floating on a warm Caribbean breeze. That song didn't scream for attention, it pleaded for mercy. This is the story of a track that wasn't supposed to be a single, a relationship kept in the shadows, and the night a Blitz kid conquered the global airways. Folks, we have reached the moment when we meet Boy George, we meet Culture Club, and we hear Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? This is track 5. If you're new to this pod, where have you been? Okay, let's give you a mulligan and instead give you the nutshell version of London in 1980. Punk was dead, and in its ashes rose the New Romantics. The epicentre of this universe was the Blitz Club in Covent Garden, run by Steve Strange and Rusty Egan. It was a club famously selective about who got past the door. If you didn't look like a work of art, you weren't allowed in. Boy George, along with one or two others, became like furniture. he became the human centrepiece. He was working as a window dresser by day at a shop called Street Theatre, but by night he was a living, breathing fashion statement. His striking androgynous look eventually caught the eye of Matthew Ashman, the guitarist for the new wave band Bow Wow Wow. Ashman heard George singing and suggested him to the band's legendary chaotic manager, Malcolm McLaren, the man who had previously masterminded the Sex Pistols. McLaren, always looking for a visual gimmick, decided to add George to Bow Wow Wow as a second lead vocalist alongside a teenage Annabella Lewin. McLaren dubbed him Lieutenant Lush. George's tenure as Lieutenant Lush lasted for exactly 2 live gigs, culminating in a performance at Manchester Polytechnic in March 1981. He was far too charismatic, and he completely upstaged the lead singer. McLaren fired him. Rather than being defeated, George took it as a spark of pure defiance. As George later recounted in a career retrospective, being fired made him think, how dare they fire me? I'm going to set up my own band. George teamed up with bassist Mikey Craig. They brought in a guitarist named Roy Hay and a seasoned drummer named John Moss. Originally, they briefly called themselves Sex Gang Children, but they soon rebranded as Culture Club to reflect the wildly diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds of the band's members. Plus, was the charts really ready for a band called Sex Gang Children? They signed to Virgin Records and went into Red Bus Studios in London with producer Steve Levine to record their debut album, Kissing to Be Clever. The first 2 singles, White Boy and I'm Afraid of Me, completely flopped on the charts. The band was desperate for a hit. They needed a 3rd single, and they turned to a track they had treated almost as an afterthought, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? The lyrics were a deeply personal, sorrowful confession written by Boy George about his secret, highly tumultuous romantic relationship with the band's drummer, John Moss. At the time, the public had no idea they were a couple, making the track a hidden in plain sight cry of heartbreak. George actually didn't want the song released because he thought it was too slow and personal, but the band and label pushed it forward. Released in mid-September 1982, the single entered the UK charts at a miserable number 66. Then, a stroke of pure pop luck happened. Singer Shakin' Stevens fell ill and pulled out of the BBC's flagship music show Top of the Pops. Culture Club were called in as a last-minute replacement. That evening, millions of British households watched this beautiful, confusing, utterly captivating figure glide across their television screens. The performance was a national shockwave. 5 weeks later, on the 23rd of October 1982, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me hit number 1 on the UK singles chart. Boy George became an overnight cultural icon, famously telling Musician magazine in October 1983 about a specific lyric in the song. There's a line from Do You Really Want to Hurt Me that says, "Everything's not what you see," which is basically what I believe. But that was only the beginning. The song became a massive global juggernaut, topping the charts in over a dozen countries and peaking at number 2 on the US Billboard Hot 100 for 3 consecutive weeks in early 1983. Culture Club had arrived, and pop music would never look or sound the same again. For track 6, An Actual Scandal. Have you ever wondered how the charts are compiled, or at least were? We're about to draw back the veil. We have finally reached our one and only encounter with an Essex power pop outfit whose brief flash of fame burned bright before being thoroughly extinguished by one of the most notorious chart manipulation scandals of the era. Next up on our journey, we're queuing up a track that managed to leap into the top tier of the charts, securing a legacy draped in catchiness and corporate controversy. From their self-titled debut album released on Creole Records, this is Danger Games by the Pinkees. If that track sounded like a highly polished retro-flavoured mashup of Squeeze, Elvis Costello and The Knack, you are not alone in your appraisal. It's an incredibly hooky slice of early 80s new wave power pop. But while the music was clean, the statistics behind its rise were anything but. Let's start with the human beings behind the instruments. The Pinkees hailed from Basildon and Langdon in Essex. The group was fronted by lead vocalist and rhythm guitarist Paul Egholm, alongside co-vocalist and guitarist Andy Price. The rest of the lineup consisted of Max Reinsch on guitar and keyboardist Neville Kiddier on bass and Paul Reynolds on drums. If those names sound vaguely familiar to absolute chart obsessives, it's because Andy Price and Neville Kiddier previously played together in a rock band called Glider, who actually made an appearance on Top of the Pops back in 1976. For their studio work as the Pinkees, their record producer Keith Bonswell stepped in to provide additional piano tracks and backing vocals. The group signed with Creole Records, an independent label, and began releasing material in 1982. Their first single failed to make a true dent, but their sophomore effort, the very song we just heard, Danger Games, was destined for the history books, though for all the wrong reasons. When Danger Games was dropped into the UK marketplace, it initially followed a relatively modest trajectory. However, the track's performance on the official UK singles chart suddenly defied the standard laws of musical physics. The single was seemingly stalling out at number 27, appearing to have hit its natural ceiling, and when you listen to the track, that feels about right. Then suddenly, the record experienced a massive and highly suspicious vertical leap, skyrocketing all the way up to peak at number 8. This sudden surge immediately triggered massive alarm bells across the music industry. In 1982, the official UK charts were compiled by the British Market Research Bureau, commonly known as BMRB. The BMRB gathered sales data via a network of selected chart shops where sales were recorded. This methodology, however, was notoriously vulnerable to chart hyping or rigging, a practice where labels or hired agents would figure out which shops were chart data stores and go in to buy copies of a single to artificially inflate its position. An internal investigation into the sudden rise of Danger Games revealed blatant irregularities. It turned out that artificial hyping had occurred. The manipulation was so trackable that the single was formally named as one of 2 at the time which had directly benefited from explicit chart rigging. The scandal cut deep. The BMRB discovered inside collusion, was forced to officially suspend a member of its own staff for misconduct relating to the data manipulation. The fallout from the specific incident completely destroyed the industry's trust in the BMRB's ability to maintain data integrity, causing them to lose their prestigious long-term chart compilation contract. The contract was promptly handed over to Gallup soon after. The profound irony of the scandal is that while the data was fraudulent, the exposure it initially bought the band was completely real. Because they had landed a top 10 hit on paper, the BBC booked them. The Pinkees made high-profile national television appearances to perform Danger Games, including spots on the daytime show Pebble Mill at 1, and the Holy Grail, of course, Top of the Pops. In fact, they performed on Top of the Pops twice. Their first appearance occurred on September the 30th on a special edition celebrating 15 years of Radio 1. Their second appearance on October the 14th. Unfortunately for the band, the chart rigging revelation essentially destroyed their radioactive reputation in the industry. Danger Games quickly tumbled out of the charts. Their self-titled debut album Pinkees was pressed onto vinyl by Creole Records in 1982 but was completely starved of promotion. The band attempted to salvage their career, releasing a follow-up single titled I'll Be There in 1983, but the public and radio programmers completely turned their backs. It stalled out at a dismal number 87. By the end of 1983, after releasing just 4 singles and 1 tainted album, the band split up and dissolved into history. Today, it is a stark factual reminder that playing danger games with the UK chart system usually ends with the house winning. We end the first half of playlist 47 by examining a track that serves as a beautiful, glowing anomaly in the landscape of late 20th century R&B. It is a song that did absolutely nothing in its home country, but managed to stop an entire transatlantic nation dead in its tracks. Imagine writing a gorgeous, soaring love ballad that barely registers a whisper on the American Billboard charts, only to watch it cross the Atlantic Ocean and become a towering monumental classic in the UK. This is a slice of smooth, soulful euphoria. It is built on a striking keyboard line, a lilting acoustic guitar, and a vocal melody that feels like a warm embrace on a cold evening. This track climbed all the way to the upper echelons of the British charts, soundtracking weddings, school discos and television specials. Let's dive into the 1982 signature hit from the Breaking Out album. This is Zoom by Fat Larry's band. Track 7, our final track today. Let's meet the man who gave the group its distinct name and rhythmic heartbeat. Larry James, affectionately known to the music world as Fat Larry, was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on the 2nd of August 1949. Philadelphia in the 1970s was an absolute crucible for soul music, dominated by the legendary, sophisticated Philly soul sound engineered by producers like Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff. Larry James was deeply embedded in this rich musical ecosystem. Before stepping out to front his own ensemble, James spent years honing his craft as a talented drummer, playing session work and touring with iconic soul groups like the Delphonics and Blue Magic. In 1976, James decided it was time to step up into the driver's seat. He formed Fat Larry's band in Philadelphia, assembling a large collective of local musicians to deliver a heavy mixture of funk, disco and rhythm and blues. The expansive original lineup of the group included Larry James on drums and vocals, Larry LeBez on bass, Erskine Williams on keyboards, Ted Cohen on drums, and Art Capehart handling trumpet and flute. Over the years, the rotating roster grew to feature other key musicians such as guitarist Tony Middleton, vocalist Freddie Campbell and Daryl Grant, saxophonist Doug Jones, and trombonist Jimmy Lee. Fat Larry's band was a relentlessly hard-working outfit. They recorded multiple studio albums, navigating through contracts with labels like WMOT Records, Fantasy, Virgin, and Omni Records. They earned an early reputation as a formidable funk and dance band. In fact, the raw opening drum break from their song Down on the Avenue, featured on their 1976 debut album Feel It, became a foundational staple for hip-hop. It was later sampled by legendary golden era rap acts, including NWA, Ice-T, the Jungle Brothers, and Run DMC. The band achieved some early, moderate commercial success across the Atlantic. Songs like Centre City and Boogie Town managed to crack the lower rungs of the UK singles chart in the late 1970s. Meanwhile, their slick groove Act Like You Know grew into a major club hit, eventually cementing its place in popular culture decades later on the soundtrack for the 2002 video game Grand Theft Auto Vice City. By 1982, the band was preparing their studio album Breaking Out. Larry James served as the primary producer for the project. According to historical breakdowns by the Joints of the Day Music Journal, the follow-up single to Act Like You Know was the energetic track Be My Lady, which was co-written by James and his wife Doris. However, it failed to chart. The subsequent third single, Traffic Stopper, suffered a similar fate, failing to find commercial traction. Everything changed when they released the album's fourth single, a sweeping ballad called Zoom. Unlike much of their self-penned funk material, Zoom was written by two outer architectural minds of the Philly music scene, Len Berry and Bobby Eli. Bobby Eli was a founding member and lead guitarist of MFSB, who we met in episode 19, the famed house studio band for Philadelphia International Records. Len Barry was a veteran singer and writer who had achieved solo chart fame in the 1960s with his hit 123. When Fat Larry's band delivered Zoom to the public, the reaction in their native US was incredibly frosty. The song sputtered out and completely stalled, peaking at number 89 on the US Billboard R&B chart and failing to enter the mainstream Billboard Hot 100 entirely. However, the story in the UK was a complete fairy tale. Released on the Virgin Records label, the heartfelt ballad exploded in popularity across British radio. In October 1982, Zoom soared all the way to number 2 on the UK singles chart. The single performed exceptionally well globally, reaching the top 10 on the official music charts in Australia and New Zealand as well. The song became an instant cultural touchstone in Britain. Its rapid ascent led to a memorable performance by the band on BBC's Top of the Pops. The song was so ubiquitous during the autumn of 1982 that it was prominently featured in the Christmas special episode of the smash hit British television sitcom Only Fools and Horses, titled Diamonds Are for Heather. The massive international success of Zoom provided the definitive high watermark for the group. They continued to record and tour, but they would never again replicate the same commercial magic of that specific ballad. The story of Fat Larry's band came to a sudden, tragic close just 5 years later. On the 5th of December 1987, Larry James suffered a sudden, fatal heart attack. He was just 38 years old. Devastated by the premature loss of their founder, drummer, producer and namesake, the remaining members of the band decided to dissolve the group, bringing an end to their original recording journey. Though their time in the spotlight was cut short, the band left behind an enduring legacy. Every time the opening chords of Zoom ring out on retro radio stations, the spirit of Philadelphia soul lives on. So what a playlist so far, and what a bumper episode. Most of our episodes run to about 40 minutes, but this one's already at the 52-minute mark. But it's full of really good stuff this week. I'm hoping you'll agree. We'll do come back next week as well as we plunge further into September 1982 and the second half of Playlist 47. Both the Jam and the Clash almost but not quite reached their denouement. Peter Gabriel proves he's light years ahead of everyone else in the synth arms race. We end the Roxy Music story and explore their legacy, and we finish the episode with a memory dear to my heart, featuring a very young reggae group asking to pass the duchy. If you enjoy what you hear, do remember to click subscribe, and if you can leave us a review please, or a rating on your pod platform of choice, it all helps. But until next time, have a great week, and we'll see you again on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.